around the world. Some staggering statistics jump out at you right away when you start talking about men in our society today. Men are less likely to have bachelor's degrees. Men are almost across the board responsible for mass shootings. Men are also much more likely to commit suicide. And when they commit suicide, they are most likely to do it with a gun that's readily available in a country that has, well, a gun fetish. The fetishization of guns in the United States has become a real problem. But back to the topic of hand, and that is men. Men. There are plenty of reasons to have beaten up on men in the past, but now we are trying to level the playing field. Not just for women who have done exceedingly well over the last 20 years, but for men as well. I mean, when was the last time you looked at the graduating class of a medical school and counted the number of men in that photograph? The last time I did it, it was at East Tennessee State University's medical school, and there was one male graduate. I don't remember the year, but it's been within the last 3 or 4 years. That's where we are today. Studies show that roughly 39% of women in the United States have a college degree. That compared to 36.6% of men who have college degrees. That from NBC News. That doesn't seem like much, but once you extrapolate those numbers out, and over a 10-year period, 3% more women are getting college degrees, getting higher paying jobs, and doing better overall than men, you start to see a widening gap. A gap between women who simply won't settle for men who aren't on their level, and who can blame them? If it were the other way around, it wouldn't even be a question, but it creates a problem for men. Because of our lizard-like brains that still exist from when we lived on the savannah in Africa 200,000 years ago, being the biggest, the strongest, the most athletic, being able to bring home food and literally put it on the table or on the rock or whatever they used at that time. Those instincts still exist inside of men. And at first, the feeling can be emasculating when your female partner does better than you, when she makes more money, when she gets the job that you wish you could have gotten, or when a child is introduced to the relationship and a choice has to be made who's going to go back to work. Is it the mother who makes $200,000 a year or the father who makes $60,000 a year? Or is it both? And you're simply going to bring in childcare during the day. If you're in this very fortunate situation and you happen to be a man who's going to stay at home with the little one that was recently born, take advantage of that opportunity. As the children age, build a business. Go back to school and finish that degree. Go back to school and get a second degree. So when the time comes and you are free from the everyday burden of having to care for, let's say, a toddler or an infant, you can pursue bigger and better goals. The plight of men in this country is real. In 2021, there were 48,000 deaths by suicide in the United States. Over 65% of those suicides were men. Most of them white men. We also know that the statistics around mass shootings are overwhelmingly male. The issues with men and guns and the fetishization of guns in the United States is a real problem, one we have to get our arms around, and something we don't talk about a lot here on the Magnolia Media Network because unlike a lot of other left of center or liberal news outlets, we do own guns. We enjoy going out for target practice, but we also practice safe storage. We also practice keeping ammunition separate from the gun itself. We don't want the gun to be used against us in a home invasion, which is what happens more often than not. So using some common sense when it comes to guns is also important. But some of the statistics around men and women, and boys and girls are staggering. As I shuffle through my notes here to give you some exact numbers, equa-law.uk came up with a list of 10 male disadvantages. First of all, 54% of boys meet the expected standard in reading, writing, and arithmetic, while 63%, that's a 10% gap, of girls met the expected standard in the same categories. A little personal note. Considering boys mature more slowly than girls, perhaps we should consider holding them back. Let's not start boys in kindergarten at 5. Let's start them at 6 or 7, when their brains have had a chance to mature to the same point as young ladies. It's just a thought, but they've been using it in sports for years and years to have better athletes by the time they're seniors in high school, especially around football and especially in the southeastern United States. Now, that was, of course, an English study, but our two societies mirror each other so closely that I felt it was relevant to our discussion today. Now this, NBC reports in 2021, 39.1% of women had college degrees, as I mentioned before, and 36% of men had college degrees. And this has been a huge change in a rather short amount of time. In 1970, the number of women with college degrees was 8%. 8. That is tiny, minuscule. And then suddenly, slowly but surely, over the next 30 years, women started to expand. They started to expand their horizons when barriers were taken out of their way, when a woman no longer needed a husband or a father to sign for her to get a credit card, which was a practice that went on well into the 1970s across the country. Yeah, it's hard for us to imagine now, but that was once the norm. This also from NBC News, from an article dated April of 2023. It's a little more information, and this, a little dark. It does reference suicide, and it does reference violence. So if you're listening to this with a little one around, maybe take them out of the room or pause the podcast and come back to it later. AFSP.org. In 2021, suicide ranked 11th in cause of death in the U.S., with 48,183 dead. In 2021, that was 3.9 times more men than women. White males made up 69.68% of these suicides. Think about that. Of all the suicides in the country, 70% of them were committed by white men. Also, from the 2021 study, 54.64% of these deaths included, you got it, firearms. Firearms make it easy. There is no cool down time. You can just pick it up, boom, lights out, and it's over. And by the way, the .org I referenced at the beginning of this study stands for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So it's their business. It's what they do. We also know the overwhelming number of mass shootings that make headlines are committed by white men. From Statista.com, since 1982 through December of 2023, 80 mass shootings were committed by white males. 26 were committed by black men, 12%, or rather 12 by Latinos, 10 by Asians, and only 3 by Native Americans, which I kind of found a little bit striking. Native Americans were so low on that list, but something has stopped them from going as far off the rails as white men. During that same period, 82 through December of 2023, out of 149 mass shootings, a staggering 143 were committed by men, only 4 by women, and 2 by men and women together. Sort of a Bonnie and Clyde situation. What do all of these numbers ultimately mean? Well, using old-fashioned thinking, it means it makes men feel emasculated. However, that thought, perpetuated by far-right TV and radio hosts like Jesse Waters and Charlie Kirk, is negative for society. There's nothing positive about it. They're giving men the illusion that they should be out being the breadwinners, even if their earning potential is less than that of their wives or their female partners. They prefer women barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. And that's simply never going to happen again, as the majority of our doctors will soon be women if they're not already. The majority of our jurists and attorneys will be women if they're not already. So, we have our own icons on the left, or left of center. People like Prof G, Professor Galloway, the co-host of the world-famous podcast Pivot, and of course, the owner of Prof G Media, which has a couple of podcasts a week, mostly dealing with business, but also talking a lot about manliness and manhood and what it takes to be a good man. We need more men graduating from college. We need more men going into really good jobs. And not all of them require a college degree. Not everyone is cut out for a white-collar job. Not everyone was meant to be in the office all day, every day. Some people have been looked down upon for what? For working jobs that pay 6 figures a year. From electricians to carpenters to heavy equipment operators and plumbers. I've known plumbers who make over $250,000 a year. I've known electricians who make more than that, working with their hands, using their minds to solve problems as they wire a house or they fix the wiring in a house. They're specialty trained. Even HVAC certifications can be very, very lucrative. And it's time to stop looking down our nose at men who work those types of jobs, because they can support their families and they can do something that they enjoy. Here's another one. How about welding? And how about putting these trades in schools starting in high school so people can come right out of high school at age 18, 19, 20 and get very limited certification and be ready to go right to the job site as a welder, making hundreds of dollars an hour. We have to support our young men in whatever decision they make when it comes to their career, as long as we're promoting them getting into a career of some kind. Just allow them to sort of find their way to what they do best. That's the best advice I can give as a grown man who has found his way to something he loves to do. And I love doing this job. I love bringing you this information. I love breaking down these statistics. Now, I hate the fact that the suicide rate is so heavily male. I hate that the suicide rate is so high, period. We're talking about 40,000 plus people a year who are taking their own life. And then let's not forget that 22 veterans a day take their own life. Something that may have fallen from the headlines as of late, but is still very much a reality. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or shell shock as they used to call it, really affects these young men and women long after their deployments are over, long after their uniforms are hung up, and they're no longer active members of the Marine Corps, the Army, the Air Force, or the Navy. Our mission should simply be molding better young people so that society is better for them, so that they do better than their parents. That has always been the American dream. And we can still make that possible. But we have to put an emphasis on two things. One, not being emasculated by female partners who simply do better than they. If you have a female partner who makes more money than you, and a child enters the situation, she becomes pregnant, has a child, and goes back to work because she makes 4 times as much money as you, then that gives you an opportunity. It gives you an opportunity to be there in the early days with your baby, with your toddler. Then it gives you an opportunity, because of the ability to take classes online, to finish a degree, to start a degree, to start a second degree, to get a master's, to try to get into a PhD program. There are so many different things men can be doing other than sitting around listening to Joe Rogan and having their mind poisoned. And understanding that not everyone is built for college, meaning that these trades need to be taught as early as possible. And we need to push young men in that direction. It's okay to have calluses on your hands, to have burns on your forearms. It's okay to be a chef, to be a heavy equipment operator, to be a welder, whatever it might be, an electrician. And again, I reference the electrician from over 20 years ago who was pulling down 160 a year on the low end, high end 220 a year. And this is going back 20 years ago when Tennessee was a relatively inexpensive place to live. It's not anymore. The price of a house in Tennessee has more than doubled in the last 5 years. But $160K a year, $200K a year is enough to live a decent life in Lower Manhattan, in D.C., in Chicago, in Los Angeles. It's enough to have a nice home, to have a family vehicle, especially in an urban setting where most people are going to, jump in an Uber or a cab and go across town or use public transportation in another way like a subway. It's a wonderful situation. And these are first world problems, but they're problems we can fix. Again, we have the fetishization of guns in this country, which is something that has to be broken, that has to be stopped, because it makes violence too easy. When you hear about someone going on a rampage in a country like England with a knife, killing one person and injuring two or three before being subdued by a crowd. It's much more difficult to subdue someone with an AR-15 who's spraying 100 rounds at a time into a crowd at a rock concert or at the Route 66 Country Music Festival in Las Vegas a few years ago, or little children at Sandy Hook Elementary in 2012, or even here in the state of Tennessee just, 2 years ago in Nashville. Not even 2 years ago, a year ago now. These things happen, and we can steer our young men away from this type of behavior. Another staggering statistic, just a little something to take home with you before I wrap this newsletter up. 50% of men in this country will never experience an intimate relationship. That doesn't mean they won't have sex. That means they will never experience intimacy. That should make everyone's heart hurt. That many people won't experience perhaps the most precious thing there is in life, and that's an intimate relationship with someone else. It's a shame, but it's a reality, and it's one that we have to face. So, as we think about how to improve the lives of men, the way we once thought about improving the lives of women, getting more men away from the far right-wing behavior, from the misogyny, from the xenophobia, homophobia, the outright racism, just the nastiness, their embrace of people like Donald Trump. It's time to embrace these men and make them feel as though they are part of society, whether they're bricklayers or stockbrokers. It doesn't make any difference. We have to promote our men, and it starts at a young age. It starts by paying teachers better and promoting public schools so that our young men are getting positive male role models and positive affirmation at a young age, so that they understand that they're important, that they have someone who can take them under their wing. I immediately think about LeBron James and his own story, when he said up until age 13, no one had ever taken an interest in him. And finally, I think it was a football coach, not a basketball coach, who got LeBron away from some of the not so savory fellows he was hanging around with at the time. And it led to one of the greatest players in NBA history, in team sport history. And, by the way, he's a billionaire as a consequence. You just never know. But being able to bring home a good six-figure salary with weekends off, with big-time overtime pay, when you're being paid $200 an hour to work an excavator already, and then they want to pay you overtime. I mean, you're making $300-something an hour. Of course, you're going to take it. You're going to go to work and do what you have to do. Now, some of these jobs that are what we consider upper middle class, white collar jobs, they might be susceptible to AI. But I guarantee you this, wiring a house for electricity is not a job that's going to be taken by AI. Neither is heavy equipment operator. Neither is plumbing. And again, plumbing can produce a high six-figure income, especially for someone who has the instincts to start their own business and to hire plumbers to go out and do the majority of the work, put themselves on rotation and take work on their own, and ultimately just sit back and enjoy their wealth. Because a certain amount of it is necessary, but we don't embrace those as a society. Again, we look down our nose at that type of work. And how dare we look down our nose at men who work and have calluses on their hands at the end of the day. Men who put in 10, 12 hours a day roofing or framing a house or running the electricity for said house or the plumbing for that house or running landscaping crews, whatever it might be. Let's start training our young men earlier. Let's let them mature at their pace and make sure they have positive male role models around them. In the weeks to come, we'll be talking more about this subject in our weekly newsletter that will either come out on Fridays or on Sundays. And next week it will be dating apps and the end of, office work. And the fact that 1 in 4 relationships started at, you guessed it, the workplace. Nowadays you have to go and let HR know about it once your relationship's official. But it's still the ultimate meeting place. As church attendance has plummeted, and as an atheist, I'm fine with that. I don't believe we have to have church as an excuse to get together as a society. However, it does create some sense of community. And you get that community by going to the office, even when it flat out sucks. We have to get back to work in this country. And that might sound right-wingish to you. That might sound unfair. But maybe it's 3 days a week. Maybe it's 4 days a week. Maybe it's 2 days a week. But it's time at work. It's time with your coworkers. It's time to rid yourself of this antisocial behavior that's leaving so many people in the dark and ruining so many lives because of access to things like guns. And those are, my thoughts this week. I appreciate you so much for listening in to the Magnolia Media Network and this, our weekly newsletter. We'll also have an episode up for you tomorrow talking about the things happening with you-know-who. But at any rate, if you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure and support us. Please support us and our hope to expand our journalism at patreon.com/Magnolia Media Network, patreon.com/Magnolia Media Network. Follow me, Magnolia John 2024, on Instagram, constantly posting pictures, videos. I'm always traveling, especially from here to DC, and from DC to Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. You never know where I might pop up, just about anywhere. So give us a like, give us a follow. Check out the handful of YouTube videos I've managed to post so far. They're not the best, but it's just a little reminder that we're there, we're here, we're listening, we're paying attention, and we're commenting on a regular basis. We're the South's only liberal, progressive, left of center news network, and that's what we hope to become, a true news network with reporters in the field doing this investigative work on our behalf. And only you guys can help us do that. So, like this, follow our podcast, download, and leave a response. Leave us a little rate and review. It's okay, I go back and read them ever so often. And by the way, we're growing 50% a month. We continue on this pace, and we'll get to the numbers we need in order to really start making a profit and a change. Because we're not here just to make a whole bunch of cash, fill our pockets, and run away. We're here to promote real media that bends toward the 45% of Tennesseans and North Carolinians and Georgians and South Carolinians who are left of center or liberal or progressive. to give you some media ecosystem that isn't just in New York or Los Angeles or DC, sort of in liberal hideaways where they're constantly preaching to the choir. We're here for converts, and we're here for you, the people who feel like, blue dots in a red bucket of paint. We're Blue Dot Radio, baby. So be sure and smash that follow button. Be sure, rate, and review our podcast. And when you check us out on YouTube, search Magnolia Media Network, and you'll see my beautiful mug. I'm talking about the events of the day. So once again, thank you for listening to the Magnolia Media Podcast, the Magnolia Media Network. Until next time, be well.